Imagine waking up in a sterile room. The lights above you burn too bright. A voice you don't recognize asks you questions you don't understand. You feel strange. Not because you're sick. Not because you've taken something willingly. But because someone, somewhere, has slipped something into your veins, into your food, into your drink. You didn't consent. You didn't even know. And yet your thoughts are no longer your own. What if I told you this wasn't a scene from a horror film? What if I told you this was the United States government and you were the experiment? Welcome to MKUltra. This was no ordinary government program. This was not about defending freedom or keeping the country safe. It was about power. It was about control. It was about bending human beings until they broke. And the most chilling part? Many of the victims never even knew they were part of it. Ordinary citizens, college students, prisoners, mental patients, even government employees. They all became unwitting test subjects in a secret war to master the mind. But this story isn't just about history. It's about betrayal. It's about lives shattered in silence. And it's about how, even today, the scars of MKUltra run deeper than most Americans realize. Because when a government crosses the line and treats its own people as expendable, when the human mind itself becomes a battlefield, the damage doesn't fade with time. It lingers, it festers, and it poisons generations. This is how MKUltra ruined the minds of Americans. But to truly understand how deep this nightmare goes, we need to go back. Back to the ashes of World War II. Back to a time when fear ruled the world and the Cold War had just begun. And it all started with a desperate question whispered in the halls of the CIA: what if the human mind could be controlled? Chapter 1: The Birth of a Nightmare. The year is 1945. The world is broken. Cities lie in ruins. The atom bomb has just been unleashed, and humanity realizes it has entered an age of terrifying possibility. But while most people are trying to rebuild, the United States intelligence community is obsessed with one thing: secrets. And in the shadows, those secrets often come from the enemy. After the fall of Nazi Germany, Allied forces uncovered something chilling. Medical experiments so grotesque they defied comprehension. Prisoners of war tortured in the name of science. Drugs tested on unwilling subjects. Attempts to alter memory, induce obedience, and break the will of the human spirit. For most, these revelations were evidence of war crimes. Proof of humanity's darkest depths. But for some within American intelligence, they were something else. Opportunity. If the Nazis had experimented with the mind, could the US harness the same knowledge? Could they weaponize psychology, drugs, and hypnosis, not for healing but for control? At the same time, whispers began to surface from the Soviet Union. Reports suggested the Russians were experimenting with their own mind control techniques. Brainwashing, hypnotic suggestion, drugs that could turn men into obedient tools of the state. To the CIA, this wasn't science fiction. It was a threat. And in their paranoia, they convinced themselves of one simple, chilling truth. If the Soviets gained control of the human mind, the United States could lose the Cold War without a single shot being fired. And so, MKUltra was born. In 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles approved what would become one of the most infamous and sinister projects in US history. Its codename, MKUltra. The mission: simple on paper, monstrous in reality, to explore methods of controlling human behavior, to erase memories, to implant new ones, to break a mind and rebuild it in the image the government desired. To achieve this, they would need test subjects. Many. Thousands. And they would get them through deception, through coercion, and through outright violation of human rights. But before the world could learn the horrors of MKUltra, the CIA needed something else. A weapon. And they found it in a colorless, odorless liquid. LSD. Lysergic acid diethylamide. A chemical discovered almost by accident by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann in 1938. He'd taken a small dose, gone for a bike ride, and suddenly found himself spiraling into a kaleidoscope of hallucinations. To most scientists, LSD was fascinating, a doorway into the mysteries of consciousness. To the CIA, It was something far darker. What if LSD could make a spy confess secrets? What if it could make a soldier obey orders without hesitation? What if it could wipe a person's mind clean, turning them into a blank slate ready to be reprogrammed? The possibilities were too tempting. And so, MKUltra researchers began dosing subjects, sometimes in labs, sometimes in the field, often without their knowledge. College students lured into experiments with the promise of money. Psychiatric patients given doses as part of treatment. Prisoners offered rehabilitation, while in reality, they were being pumped full of hallucinogens. The CIA even ran experiments in safe houses disguised as brothels, where unsuspecting men were drugged, observed, and manipulated while hidden cameras recorded everything. This wasn't research. It was predation. And behind every experiment was the same twisted goal: to crack open the human mind and learn how to control it. Think about what this meant. The very institution sworn to defend American freedom was secretly stripping away the most fundamental freedom of all: the freedom of one's own thoughts. Victims experienced terrifying hallucinations, paranoia, psychological breakdowns. Some never recovered, some died, and some never even realized what had been done to them. Because in the world of MKUltra, consent did not exist. The CIA justified it all under the banner of national security. If the Soviets were experimenting on minds, then America had to do the same, or risk falling behind. But here's the chilling reality. The Soviets never actually developed the sophisticated mind control techniques the CIA feared. Much of it was paranoia fueled by Cold War hysteria, which means thousands of Americans suffered for nothing. By the mid-1950s, MKUltra had grown into a sprawling web of over 150 subprojects. Universities, hospitals, prisons, pharmaceutical companies, all unknowingly caught in the CIA's grip. But here's the nightmare. It wasn't just willing collaborators who suffered. Ordinary Americans, people who trusted their doctors, their schools, their government, were about to become guinea pigs in the most dangerous psychological experiment in history. And the question that haunted them wasn't just, "What's happening to me?" It was this: if I can't trust my own mind, what can I trust? Chapter 2: The Human Lab Rats. The nightmare deepened. By the mid-1950s, MKUltra wasn't a single project anymore. It was a spider's web. Over 150 sub-projects stretched across universities, hospitals, prisons, even front companies. Some researchers knew who was funding them. Most didn't. And the victims? They were everywhere. College students lured by small stipends. Patients who trusted their doctors. Prisoners promised rehabilitation. Soldiers told they were serving their country. But behind the curtain, they were guinea pigs. Imagine being locked in a room for days. No sound, no light, no human contact. Just endless silence. Your mind starts to unravel. You hallucinate voices. Shapes crawl across the walls. You begin to wonder if you even exist anymore. This was sensory deprivation, a favorite tool of MKUltra researchers. They wanted to see how quickly a mind could collapse when stripped of stimulation. Then there was hypnosis. Could a man be placed into a trance so deep that he would carry out an order, even an assassination, without remembering it later? And of course there was LSD. The doses weren't gentle. They weren't measured with care. Some subjects were given small amounts. Others were overloaded, hundreds of times the safe dosage, just to see what would happen. What happened was madness. Perhaps the most haunting case was that of Frank Olson, a biochemist working for the CIA itself. He wasn't an outsider, he was on the inside. But one night at a retreat with colleagues, someone slipped LSD into his drink. What followed was paranoia, confusion, a complete mental breakdown. 9 days later, Olson fell to his death from a 13th floor hotel window in New York City. The CIA called it a suicide. His family was told he had suffered from depression. But decades later, evidence emerged. He had been secretly dosed. He had begun questioning the morality of the CIA's programs. He had expressed a desire to leave. And perhaps that made him dangerous. Frank Olson's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. If even a CIA scientist wasn't safe, what chance did ordinary Americans have? Then there were the countless nameless victims. A college student in Kentucky who signed up for psychological research, only to end up strapped to a chair, tripping on LSD, while strangers took notes on his terror. A housewife in Canada who went to her doctor for depression, only to be subjected to months of drug-induced comas, electroshock, and endless taped messages whispered into her ears while she slept, an attempt to erase her personality and replace it with something new. Prisoners in America's darkest corners, pumped with drugs, promised freedom if they cooperated, only to be discarded when they broke down. Some lost their memories, some lost their sanity, some lost their lives. And the cruelest part? They never knew why. In San Francisco and New York, the CIA operated what they called safe houses. But they were anything but safe. They posed as brothels. Sex workers hired by the agency lured unsuspecting men inside. Once there, the men were secretly dosed with LSD while CIA operatives watched through one-way mirrors. The purpose? To test how drugs affected sexual behavior. To see if secrets could be extracted in moments of vulnerability. It was voyeurism disguised as science. Exploitation masquerading as research. And none of the victims ever knew they had been part of an experiment. For many, the damage was permanent. Victims reported flashbacks years later. Some lived in constant paranoia, never sure if what they remembered was real or planted. Families were torn apart by breakdowns no one could explain. The CIA didn't care. Files were locked away. Identities buried. When a life was destroyed, it was chalked up as collateral damage in the fight against communism. But here's the truth. MKUltra wasn't about national security. It wasn't about protecting freedom. It was about control. It was about seeing just how far a human mind could bend before it shattered. And in that pursuit, the CIA created not warriors, not spies, not weapons, but ghosts. Ghosts of people who once had names, families, dreams, reduced to broken shells wandering in the aftermath of experiments they never volunteered for. By the early 1960s, MKUltra had grown too large, too messy. Accidents happened. Whispers leaked. Questions were being asked. So the CIA did what it always does when secrets threaten to surface. It buried them. Documents were destroyed. Records vanished. Victims were silenced. And for a while, it seemed as though the truth of MKUltra might never be known. But secrets have a way of rotting. And when they finally surface, the stench is impossible to ignore. Because the biggest revelation was still to come. Chapter 3: The Legacy of Betrayal. The truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. 4 years, MKUltra remained hidden in the shadows, buried under layers of classified files and official denials. Victims were dismissed as paranoid. Families were silenced with vague explanations. The public had no idea what had been done in their name. But secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have cracks. And in the 1970s, those cracks split wide open. It began with whispers. Reporters digging into strange cases of CIA misconduct stumbled onto hints of something larger. Families of victims, like Frank Olson's, kept pressing for answers. And then came the shockwave Watergate. In the aftermath of Nixon's scandal, America's trust in government hit rock bottom. The appetite for exposing hidden crimes had never been greater. And so Congress launched investigations into the intelligence community. For the first time, the CIA was forced to answer questions under oath. What those questions revealed was darker than anyone expected. In 1975, the Church Committee, led by Senator Frank Church, began peeling back the layers of CIA secrecy. Buried in their findings were fragments of MKUltra, testimonies about drugging citizens without consent, experiments in universities and hospitals, documents describing attempts to erase memories, implant false ones, and bend the will of individuals like clay. The American public was horrified. But here's the tragedy. By then, most of the evidence was already gone. 2 years earlier, in 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms had ordered all MKUltra files destroyed. He knew the investigations were coming. He wanted the trail erased. What survived were only stray documents, overlooked, misfiled, forgotten in storage. Enough to confirm the horror, but not enough to reveal the full scale. What we know about MKUltra today is just a fraction of what really happened. The rest was reduced to ash. Even so, victims began to step forward. A soldier who had been secretly dosed with LSD during training left with crippling paranoia for the rest of his life. A Canadian woman whose depression treatment turned into months of forced sleep and electroshock, leaving her unable to recognize her own children. Prisoners who endured drug trials so brutal they couldn't tell where reality ended and delusion began. Their testimonies weren't just stories. They were scars carved into living flesh. And they raised a question no investigation could answer. How many more victims were out there, too broken to speak, too silenced to be heard? The government apologized. Quietly, carefully, with the same cold precision it had used to design the experiments. A few lawsuits were settled. A few families received compensation. But money cannot buy back trust. Money cannot rebuild a shattered mind. The legacy of MKUltra wasn't just in the victims. It was in the public psyche. For the first time, Americans saw their government not as a protector, but as a predator. If the CIA could secretly dose its own citizens, what else was it capable of? Conspiracies flourished. Paranoia spread. And in a way, the CIA achieved the very thing it claimed to fear. A population that no longer trusted the world around them. MKUltra didn't just break individual minds. It cracked the collective mind of America. And here's the part that still chills historians today. We don't know if it ever truly ended. Yes, MKUltra was officially shut down in the 1970s. Yes, the files were destroyed. Yes, Congress swore it would never happen again. But secrecy is the CIA's nature. If new mind control projects were born from culture's ashes, would we ever know? The victims who spoke out were often ridiculed, dismissed as conspiracy theorists. But history tells us they were right all along. So when someone whispers that experiments continue in silence, when someone insists that governments are still searching for ways to control the mind, can we afford to say they're wrong? And that brings us back to the beginning. MKUltra wasn't a project. It was a betrayal. A betrayal of trust, of freedom, of the very idea that in America your mind is your own. It ruined lives. It destroyed families. And it left scars that stretch far beyond the individuals who suffered directly. The greatest damage MKUltra inflicted wasn't just on its victims. It was on all of us. Because it left behind a chilling truth. If you can't trust your own government, who can you trust? And that question still haunts America today. If you've stayed with me through this story, if you felt that chill run down your spine, then you know how important it is to remember, to question, to never let the darkest chapters of history be buried again. Because if we forget, they will repeat. If you want to keep uncovering the hidden stories, the suppressed truths, the forgotten betrayals that shape the world you live in, then subscribe. Because there are more secrets, more shadows, more stories they never wanted you to hear. And together, we will bring them back into the light.